start the recording. So welcome everyone. This is the Safe Routes to School Advisory Committee meeting for ODOT, and I will let our chair call us to order.
Oops, muted.
Hi, everybody. Just want to welcome everyone here for a July meeting. Hopefully we won't have too many more of these where we're all online, but I'm happy to see everybody. I know we have some important things to talk about today, so I'm looking forward to diving into the meeting and talking about different things that are on our agenda. So I'll hand it back to Leanne.
Great, thanks Rob. Thanks everyone for being here. I will start screen sharing. And here we are, the Safe Routes to School Advisory Committee meeting. A little bit about the Zoom features. I think everyone's pretty up to date on these at this point, but there's a way to mute and unmute yourself, start and stop your video. We like for our committee members to leave their videos on and any guests to turn their videos off if that's okay with folks. You can also access other options like naming yourself. There are nonverbal feedback icons that we can use during this meeting. Members can use to raise hands and other things, as well as we use the chat function in this meeting as well and record, and that's all recorded as part of our notes, and use the chat function for guests who are here to be able to identify themselves, as well as if any guest would like to provide public comment, which will be in a little while on the agenda. And a big welcome to everyone for being here at our meeting today. Chris Wachi is our facilitator from Cogito, and she will go over the goals for today.
Thanks, Leanne. One thing I did want to ask, or just to add to Leanne's comment about Zoom, because we have 25 participants and we're screen sharing, it's hard to see if sometimes going back and forth with the chat. So if you could please raise your hand too, and between Tammy, Leanne, and I will make sure that we circle back and that folks' questions are answered. So 3 hours, the goal today is to, well, there's a lot in today's agenda, but the outcome is really to provide input on the Safe Routes to School construction grant program outcomes and get that input from the SRAC to help staff create an effective scoring criteria. So a couple things about that, that this is similar to what the committee did in May for the education program. And Leanne and Heidi had the great thinking that by doing this, inverting this, originally we were going to do this in September. By doing it today, come the September meeting, we can look at the education and the construction grant program criteria, scoring criteria next to each other and kind of look at how those programs support each other and the alignment. And then it's just a higher efficiency. Did that capture your brilliant idea well, Leanne?
Heidi.
Good. All right. Next slide, please. So, sorry, just one quick thing. This is the first of 3 breakout rooms. And so with that, Leanne.
We've traditionally during this time of online meetings started our meetings off by breaking all the committee members and staff into groups of into groups of 2 and have kind of an informal networking session where you have 5 minutes together to each take 2 minutes to answer a question. And Rob, our committee chair, and I worked together to come up with the question. And this week, that question that kind of fits into the larger theme of the agenda. And this week, your question will be, how do you prioritize things in your life or work? Describe 1 or 2 of the lenses that you use. So Tammy is going to put us into breakout rooms. You'll be with 1 other person, and I will put this question. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to put this question in the chat, which I believe stays. You're still able to see the chat whenever you go into the breakout rooms. So Tammy, go ahead and hit go on the breakout rooms, and the question is in the chat. Good luck, everybody. Have fun. Turn the recording back on. I will share the screen so that you guys can see the list of committee members, but I'll stop sharing in a minute so that we can see people's faces as they introduce themselves. And Rob will do the introductions. Rob, let me know if leaving this screen up is actually helpful for you or if I can take it down.
I mean, I probably am more familiar with the different committee members, maybe because I've been on the committee for so long. So maybe take it down for now, but put it back up in a few minutes because it could help people as we get longer. So we're just going to do the popcorn approach where each person introduces themselves and then calls on a different committee member. And one thing I want to point out too is Carolina, when Leanne said earlier that a member is on maternity leave, and that's Carolina, so she won't be with us today, but hopefully either next meeting or the one after that. So I'm Rob Innerfeld, and I'm Transportation Planning Manager for the City of Eugene, and I kind of represent the League of Oregon Cities on this committee, and I will hand it off to Noelle.
Hi, everybody. My name is Noelle Mickelberry. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Regional Safe Routes to School Coordinator for Metro Regional Government in the Portland Metro region. And I will pass it off to Brian.
Great, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Potwin. Pronouns are he, him. I'm the Executive Director of Commute Options and excited to be here today. I'm going to pass it off to Mavis.
Hi, I'm Mavis Hartz. I'm in LeGrand. I am your OPPAC, the Oregon Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee member on here. And Tracy, Miss Pearl, your turn.
Good morning, everyone. It's Tracy Pearl from the Transportation Safety Office at ODOT. And as of July 1st, we are now an office within DMV of ODOT. So just wanted to say hey to everybody. Nice to see Colby here. Thanks for joining us, Colby, our new intern, and looking forward to today's conversation. Thank you.
Why don't we bring it back to our committee members? So how about Zhao? Did I say that right?
Zhao, yeah, thanks,
Okay,
Rob.
great.
Hi, everybody. My name is Zhao Zhang. You she, her pronouns. I work for the City of Portland within the Bureau of Transportation. I am a Safe Routes to School Coordinator. Sorry if I missed what else. I'm an Aquarius. Happy to be here. I'm going to pass it over to Heidi.
Hi, everyone. My name is Heidi. I'm with Oregon Department of Transportation. I work on the education side. And I also wanted to, I know Tracy mentioned Colby Parkinson's here today. He's our intern. He's going to school at OSU and lives in Corvallis right now. And he's working with Leanne and I on various projects, working on some campaigns and updating our education materials, also working with Leanne on a open house project. And we're lucky to have him for the summer. He'll be with us through September. So you may hear or see of him in some other aspect of work we're working on, but we're lucky to have him. He has a communications background and he's interested in researching physical activity and health behaviors. So welcome, Colby. And I will pass this to Brock.
Thank you. Brock Dittis, Oregon Department of Education, he, him, his. I am with the Pupil Transportation Unit with the department, and we are, sometimes it seems, the only people who think about how school buses take kids to and from school, but I joke. I will pass it to the next person, and forgive my unfamiliarity with everybody that's here. I'll choose the next participant.
Rock, it's a little hard to hear you. I just want to say that now, if there's any challenges for later.
Thanks. Sorry about that. Let me know if it improves or gets better.
And who did you pass it to?
I'm unfamiliar with the group as a whole because I'm new, so I was going to choose the next willing participant. Steve Dickey.
I'm Steve Dickey. I am with St. Mary Mass Transit District, otherwise known as Chariots. I'm the Director of Technology and Program Management. My pronouns are he, him. And I'm going to pass it on to my neighbor in the same area, and that would be Lonnie.
Thanks, Steve. I'm Lonnie Radke, Marion County engineer, and I'm representing the Oregon Association of County Engineers and Surveyors, OACs. And I am going to pass it on to Kim.
Hi, I'm Kim Crabtree, Director of Transportation for Bennett Pines School. And is there anybody who hasn't gone? Tammy, have you gone? I'll pass it to Tammy.
I'm Tammy Weil. I'm with ODOT, and I work with the Safe Routes to School program in a support role. I help Leanne with anything she needs help with.
Hey, Leanne, do you want to just pop the list back up just so we can make sure we're covering everyone? Did Lauren go yet? Would you like to go, Lauren?
Hi, I'm Lauren Morris. I am representing the, what am I representing? Thanks for the list. Now I know. Oregon Tribes Representative. I work for the Coquille Indian Tribe as their mobility coordinator out of Coos Bay, Oregon. And I think that's it. So anybody else on this list?
Eric is here. Maybe. Eric, if you're here, you might be on mute.
Maybe we can circle back to Eric.
Yeah, Eric, we still can't hear you. So if you're talking, please hop off and join back again, and maybe we can hear you. I think that's everybody. Did we miss anybody?
No, I think we're missing Danny. Danny, have you gone? I don't believe you have. And I don't think she's she's here. Sunny. And Sunny does not look like he is here. So Luis.
Oh, yes. Luis from Oregon Transportation Safety Committee, retired engineer. And it's good to see young people working so hard. Bye-bye.
Rob, I'm sorry if I jumped in to steal your thunder, but I've been monitoring the list. And I think we have everyone. Dana Nichols is not here today, I don't believe.
Yeah, she's at a sister's wedding.
Oh, good for her.
I haven't seen Trevor on the call yet.
Okay.
And Sunny, have we heard from Sunny?
Sunny mentioned that he would have to leave early, but I thought he might be here, but I heard from him before, but he's not on the call right now. I believe that is, we've worked through our committee list. There are a couple of staff members that I don't think introduced themselves that are traditional on this call. Myself, Leanne Ferguson, the Safe Routes to School Construction Program Manager. Colby Parkinson, who's our new intern. Colby, do you want to do a quick intro for yourself?
Sure, I'm Colby Parkinson, and like Heidi mentioned, I'm calling in from Fort Vallis, and I'm an intern for the summer and also did my master's at Oregon State University.
We'll also be hearing from a couple of additional staff members, Ken Schonkweiler, Alan Thompson, and Susan Pythman before the end of the meeting. I'm going to skip those introductions and maybe you can say hi whenever it's your turn, just so that we can keep on track on the agenda. And Hannah Day Capel is also joining us from Alta Planning and Design and is helping with some behind the scenes stuff and will help facilitate and do some note taking. So welcome to everybody. And we'll move on to the overview of the meeting today that Chris will walk us through.
Thank you. So as I mentioned, really paying attention to what the SRAC wanted, which was more interaction with other committee members. There are 3 breakout sessions. We've just done our first one. The only SRAC business is the review of the May notes and acceptance of that. That's the only decision that is made for this meeting, that's intended for this meeting. Public comment, Leanne, anybody for public comment?
I didn't see any. Let me do a quick
Okay.
check.
Okay. Well, that's great because that gives us a little wiggle room for some longer discussions if we need to.
Great.
And then we're going to get into the second breakout group was a discussion about why lead with race, and Leanne's going to set that up for us. The next is how ODOT integrates equity into project selection, and Ellen Thompson and Ken Schunkweiler are going to talk about the Transportation Disadvantage Index. And then we're going to have a discussion after that with the SRAC about pros, cons, any concerns about integrating that into Safe Routes to School funding selection. And then we will come to the construction program outcomes. And just a thank you to everyone who provided homework that Leanne sent out a few weeks ago. It is so helpful to get that ahead of time so that we can really use your time well and organize the agenda and highlight some of the dominant themes that we've heard. For those who didn't have a chance to do the homework, there'll be an opportunity for you to chime in as well. We will have Nikachis Perkins give an update from the Equity Office, and then Susan Pikeman will give us an update on the Bike Ped Strategic Program, and then Heidi has a few fun things to say at the celebration station. And then, as we do it with all meetings, we wrap it up and we do a quick check-in with the SRAC. So with that, let's launch in. So the SRAC business, as I mentioned, if people could, are there any comments about the May notes? And if not, if you could indicate with acceptance, not fully supportive, need to talk about it. The notes need a lot of work. So I can't see folks, so if we could stop screen sharing just for a moment. Any comments? Okay, I got thumbs. Let's see, let me just put that up. Great, great. Rob, I'm sorry, Rob, Brian, I'm going through my list. Thank you, yay. Brock, you're good. Zhao, thank you. Hi, Steve. Good. Mavis, excellent. Okay, am I missing anybody here? I don't think so. All right, thank you. So we are moving on back to you, Leanne, about
this is actually the point for the public comment, but I think we determined we don't have any public comment. So we'll keep running, we keep going. This is part 1 of a 2-part discussion that we want to have this meeting and next meeting, following up from the conversations that we started last month. So this will be kind of an ongoing talking about meeting with racial equity on the Safe Routes to School Advisory Committee. So over the last several months, the advisory committee has updated your guiding principles. The most big update was changing the wording of social equity, prioritizing social equity to prioritize addressing transportation disparities. And the other big change was creating an overarching principle to lead with race, to focus on racial equity. So at our last meeting, we talked a little bit about how to do that, but we actually think upon further consideration, we think that we may have started a few steps ahead, and we wanted to back up at our meeting today and talk about why. So I really appreciate this quote from Maya Angelou, and I think it sets us up today to talk about racial equity and to start that conversation. Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. So I really identify with this, especially around this topic, because I find myself learning a lot as I go and making a lot of missteps. And the point is to do that, to learn a lot and to learn from those missteps and then do better. So we wanted to point out that our committee is not really racially diverse. So as part of this journey together to figure out what leading with race looks like, we are going to dig into our own knowledge base and do our own research, and that no one person on this committee should represent the racial group that they are in, for everyone, regardless of who you are and what color and how you identify. Like we don't want to ask you to represent the entire group of your race. So we are going to start digging into some of that information, and we're going to build on the learning from our last meeting and continue learning. So we started with the how, but again, we thought that was a little bit jumping ahead. And so we want to back up and talk a little bit about why. We will follow up this activity with some homework that you'll do between this meeting and the next meeting, and a deeper dive conversation in the next meeting in September. So also want to note that talking about racial equity is a skill to practice, and we're going to use some of this time in our committee to practice some of those skills. So here is a homework. Well, I'll show this again at the end of the meeting and I'll send it to you in an email, but just an overview of the homework that you'll be getting between this meeting and the next meeting. It'll be to read a website that will tell us a little bit more about why lead with race in government. And that should be a pretty quick read and perusal of our website. And then we have a video put on by the Oregon Historical Society that is a historical perspective of race in Oregon. And it was a webinar that they put on for all the mayors of Oregon. And it's really a wonderful basis for some of the things that we're talking about on this committee. So that will be your homework. And to kick us off, to get our brains in sort of the mental space to do that homework and leading into our September meeting to talk more about why we want to lead with race. We created a small group discussion, or not, I'm sorry, just a small group breakout session. It's not actually a discussion, where we're going to ask you to choose which group that you want to go into. Once you're in that group, a staff person will facilitate a 2-minute time period, a break, where you can write down why lead with race for you. Like, what does that mean to you? Why is this committee leading with race for you? And you'll have 2 minutes to write that down. After 2 minutes is up, the staff person will ask 1 or 2 people to share. Not everybody needs to share. It's okay if there's no sharing. Really, that information is for you that you wrote down, and we will talk more about it at our September meeting. So this is sort of just getting us started. So there will be no report back from this breakout session. I will put these instructions in the chat box, and I will tell you a little bit more about the 3 groups that you're going to choose from, and then I'll have Tammy set it up for us. So this kind of stems from that thing I said earlier, that this is kind of a skill set that we are starting to practice and exercise. So so I've created 3 groups to choose from. One is, hey, I've spent little or no time talking about racial equity. The second group is, I've spent some time talking about racial equity. And the third group is, I've spent lots of time talking about racial equity. So you can pick which one of those groups you want to go into, and then you will spend the first 2 minutes writing out just for yourself why lead with race. Any questions before Tammy puts us into the groups?
Leanne?
Yes.
Can you tell them what to look for? Didn't you have to look for something at the bottom of your screen?
Oh, yes. So when Tammy hits go, there was a little pop-up in the bottom of my screen that said join a breakout room. And if you click that, the options pop up where to go. So So that's what you should look for, a little pop-up that says breakout rooms. So Tammy, go ahead and hit go, and then I'll stay here for a second while people pick their groups.
So Leanne, I just want to make sure we're straight. The 2 minutes will happen after we make our selection of where we're going, or?
Right.
Okay.
I was like mid-sentence, like mid.
I know.
That was too short.
Too short. Well, I'm glad that everyone got to write something down, and I'm really excited to dig into this more next month, or I'm in September at our September meeting. So my ask for you is to keep your notes, and then as you do the homework, add to it or change things if things change. And so we'll be ready to have a larger, deeper dive into this in our September meeting. And if you are worried that you won't be able to find these notes in 2 months, feel free to email them to me. I can keep a hold of it for you, and then you can say, Leanne, what did I say about that? And then I can remind you. So if you would like me to hold that information, I'm happy to, but I do not need to gather that. It's more just write it. I wanted folks to think about it and write it down for themselves. So we're not going to do a report back on this, although if you have anything that you want to share with me, feel free to give me a call or email me between this meeting and the next meeting. I will share the screen again. First, I need to, sorry. I need to do the presentation. There we go.
And while you're doing that, if I could just chime in, I realize I failed to let people know when the break is going to happen. And I think we were targeting around 2:30 p.m.
Great. So the next part of our time together will be to learn a little bit more about how ODOT integrates equity in project selection in other programs. We've had a couple of requests to hear about the Transportation Disadvantaged Index and how it played out in the Oregon Paths program. So Ken Schonkweiler, thank you for being here, and we'll have you present next, followed up by Alan Thompson. So if you guys could just kick off your pieces of the presentation with a short introduction of yourself, because we didn't get to hear from you earlier, that would be great. Take it away, Ken, and let me know when you want me to switch the slides.
Yeah, I'll give a wink or something. Thanks, Leanne. So my name's Ken Schonkweiler. I work in Region 2 planning. So I'm based out of Astoria, but I like hanging out with the Bike Ped program a lot and doing projects with them. So I usually jump at most opportunities to do that. And so I'm here to talk a little bit about the Transportation Disadvantaged Population Index. And Leanne, next slide, please. So a brief history on the Transportation Disadvantaged Population Index. For short, we just call this a TDPI. We've been using a model similar to this really since about 2016, when we first started having a couple of the active transportation needs inventory data sets within the region. So first up in Region 1 and then in Regions 4 and 5. And so I bring this up to point out that really we're going on 5, almost 6 years of really kind of using this data set in some capacity at ODOT. It's essentially one piece of the evaluation criteria within that larger active transportation needs inventory that prioritizes segments on the highway based on need for bikes and peds. But this is essentially our equity criteria that we use within that larger project. fast forward to really 2020, Alan incorporated the TDPI within the Community Paths program. We've had a couple of other requests from other grant programs on how this can be incorporated into it. And then the ODOT Office of Social Equity is now using a similar version, identical in analysis procedures, but a couple of different variables included in it for evaluating our 24 to 27 statewide transportation improvement plan. The version that we use for the ATNI and for community paths is a little bit more focused on active transportation. And I'll get into that in a couple slides, really the next slide. So if you could go there, Leanne. So what is this data set, right? So for those of us that work in the kind of geospatial data realm, it is an index of American Community Survey census block groups with different population variables attached to those block groups, right? And so for those of us that work in this arena, you know, you kind of download the information from the American Community Survey, you put it into the block group, and then that gives you an understanding of who and what populations live in there. You know, there's a number of different ways that you could approach social equity from a program perspective. This is just a more data-driven approach, and the approach that we're leaning on using fairly heavily throughout ODOT. So the population groups that we focus on within the TDPI, so we're talking about residents over 65, so the elderly category within the ACS, youth, non-white and Hispanic, which we've later been just terming BIPOC, but that variable within the TDPI is weighted. So if you look up in this somewhat fancy looking equation, so the NH times 1.5, we weight this variable higher within the TDPI because there's been a lot of research from particularly Josh Roll on how BIPOC and BIPOC residents in Oregon are disproportionately affected by pedestrian and bicycle crashes, right? So we're essentially putting more emphasis in the TDPI on these groups.
I'm going to pause
So
for
it
one
also,
second. Sorry, can it say that BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, People of Color, and is kind of a widely used term to describe non-white populations, but that there's also a lot of thoughts about using that word, but we use it sometimes here at ODOT with sort of the caveat of like, there is no perfect word to describe this, but that's what BIPOC means. Go ahead, Ken, thank you.
oh, thank you, Anne. That was great. Appreciate it. So we're also using data from the ACS on the number of residents that speak English not well or not at all. So that's an indication on the survey. Residents under that 200% poverty level, number of households with 0 vehicles. So this is a variable of interest from our PMT and the ATNI because those households with 0 vehicles obviously rely on active transportation more so. Number of residents with a disability, and then the number of households with 1 or more occupants per room. So we, in a nutshell, take all of this information within these census block groups, and then we divide it by the total population. And that creates an index that we have, and we can kind of break that out between a high, medium, and low equity group within the TDPI. Next slide, please. So where can you find more about this information and about the index? So I'll give a quick overview of, well, actually, I can just pass it over to Alan next. But if you're interested in reading more about the TDPI, you can click the link, or you can simply just Google the ODOT Active Transportation Needs Inventory. So we have all of our tech memos and the project website where you can click on the project website, scroll over to the social equity tab, and kind of go through and play with the tool as you wish. My contact info is right there if you have any other questions. And I guess I'd ask Leanne, do you want me to show everybody what the tool looks like really quick, or do you want to just go over to the Community Paths program?
I would say let's go to the Community Paths program, and then if we still have a little bit of time, we'll come back and you can walk us through it really quickly. Would that work? Or let's do that. I think that's perfect. Thanks so much, Ken.
That sounds good. Thank you.
Alan, you're on deck. Or you're
All
up.
right, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Alan Thompson. I'm the Oregon Community Pass Program Manager. I tend to talk really fast, so if I start speeding up, please let me know and I will slow down. Go ahead and go to the next slide. We decided to use the Transportation Disadvantage Index in 2020 to find a way of taking the subjective and making it very quantitative and compare apples to apples. And when I first heard about the Transportation Disadvantage Index, and I'll be referring to it as TDI for the rest of this presentation, that it was a good way of comparing projects and the benefits of those projects with an apples to apples comparison. And removing that subjectivity. So I thought that was just a great idea. And as Ken said, it uses census tract data. And for consistency, what we did is we took the project location and made that where the TDI score was going to be from. If the project was a mile or so long and went through several census tracts, the tract with the highest transportation index was used. Next slide, please. So here's an example of some of the issues that we came up with. This is the city of Madras and the Juniper Park connection. And Juniper Park is that light green little rectangle just to the left of the star. And the city of Madras is to the left and to the south. So the project tended to go towards the right and hook up with some trails that are on the eastern side. But the main people that would be impacted in this very sparsely populated census tract were not represented of the people who would be using the facility, which would be the city of Madras, which is to the south. And the darker the color, the higher the score. So this is an example where this methodology that we used wasn't quite the best. Next slide, please. So here's North Gresham Elementary School, and that's right in the middle of the square where we have the little red squiggly line. And the project actually connects 3 separate census tracts separate with it. So because the project connects with them, we chose the one that had the highest score. What it doesn't take into account is to the right, there is a bike lane that goes south into where it says Gresham, and that's a much higher scoring area. So that that area to the south of the school would benefit greatly, crossing past Burnside Boulevard or Burnside Road, and then connecting into the trail going to the school. And that is both an elementary school and a high school in that area, if I remember correctly. Next slide, please. This is one where it's a longer distance one where you have a 10.9 mile route that's going between Corvallis and Albany. And it's a great route for longer distances. This is a little over a 1 mile section that goes from Pilkington Road to Murloy Road. And so the question then becomes, who is the benefit? And I apologize, I don't have the right picture on here that would show what the TDI score is, but the main thing is that this is something where you have part of a much, much larger route that then has a variety of different benefits. And so who is the primary benefactor in this in terms of trying to calculate the benefits? So next slide, please. So the lessons learned, the TDI is a great tool for comparing projects at fixed locations. It compares apples to apples. For components of larger infrastructure, particularly active transportation infrastructure, it may not necessarily indicate where the greatest equity benefit exists as we are using it. And the key words there are as we are using it. And so this can negatively impact scores or components of larger projects or connections. In my discussions with some of the applicants, they would say that this path that would then connect to another path that then has greater benefits by allowing people 4 or 5 or 10 miles away to be able to connect to vital city facilities. So when we're looking at components of larger infrastructure as we go into our next cycle, we're going to be considering expanding TDI to endpoints as a possibility. It may be looking at what is the average commute for a bicyclist and having that as a radius around the project area, and looking at the TDI within that radius. So we haven't decided, but we're still trying to make sure that whatever we do is still comparing apples to apples, but still hoping to find the best way of anticipating what the benefit is for the project in terms of equity. So that's where we're at. That's our conundrum, and moving forward. So I like this tool. I think it's an absolutely fantastic tool. The question is how you, like any tool, is how you use it. So we're trying to perfect our usage of the tool. And that next slide, I think that is the last of my slides.
Great. And Alan, I have a quick question for you. Do you remember off the top of your head how heavily the transportation disadvantaged index number was weighted in your scoring?
Oh, thank you. That's a great question. The transportation disadvantage index represented a maximum of 32% of the total score.
Okay. Cool. Thanks for that reminder. And I do think we actually have Ken like 3 minutes to look at your the map. So I will stop sharing for 3 minutes. And Ken, if you could share your screen, just sort of walk people through it as you've done for me before, that would be really great. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So just real quick, as I said before, if you navigate to the Active Transportation Needs Inventory website, you can click through the tabs, go through the Transportation Disadvantage Index, and you can look at that statewide level. And, the first thing that kind of jumps out to you is that, you can see census blocks, so we know where our tribal boundaries are, right, in Oregon. So you can see very clearly places that score higher on the index are darker in these polygons. So you can see the Warm Springs tribal area, some of our tribal areas on the coast and in Southern Oregon. And then because the map is a web map and it's interactive, we can zoom in to a city such as Salem and let this load, Salem Kaiser area, and you can get an understanding of where higher numbers of the populations within the index are concentrated as opposed to in other areas. And, however, I think my takeaway for the group is that really, however this gets used, I think the important thing to point back is that you're having a data-driven conversation about social equity and really talking about how the projects that we're programming affect the people that live who have historically been disadvantaged in the transportation realm within these cities. And this is just one tool that helps you do that. So thanks, Leanne.
Great, thank you.
Leanne, it looks like we have some time if there are other questions from the committee.
Yeah, any other questions? I also wouldn't mind if we were running a little ahead of schedule because I think we'll make it up later. I do think we do have time for a couple of questions, and our next activity will be to do breakout rooms to discuss, is this applicable to Safe Routes to School? Do we want to explore this data set? What could be the unintended consequences of using this data set? And we'll do a facilitated discussion and then some report back. So you will have a chance to discuss this with other committee members and share that with us. So staff can know if you want us to really dig into this and try to figure out how to incorporate it into our program. So that's where we're headed next. So if you have any questions about the projects for Alan and Ken, now would be a great time.
I think Mavis has her hand up. You're muted, Mavis.
There we go. I was just wondering if there were any surprises when we were walking through it and categorizing and trying to be very systematic about this product. Were there any surprises that came out of it? What did you think, Alan?
Well, I think that the map that was showing Salem was a good example. As you saw some bike facilities there that were not connected once you get into the part of the downtown area. So that was the project that surprised me was that we have a project that would connect those to the Salem City Hospital area through Pringle Creek. And that was the one where you could see the benefit, but the way that we calculated by saying specifically the project location was the issue. So the idea then is finding better ways of using the tool. As an example, the average commute for walking is about half a mile before it starts dropping off drastically. For bicycling, it's less than 3 miles. So that was where I mentioned, possibly using a radius of those for looking at the score. So for, when thinking about schools, you could obviously look just at the school location, or you could look at what would be the average radius around the school where students would be walking or bicycling, and use that to calculate who might have the best benefits. And realizing that's not perfect, there's about infrastructure and a whole host of other things that come into play there. But that is one idea of a way to use it to better reflect what the equity benefits would be. Did that answer your question, or did I just go straight to the solution? And you're muted.
It kind of answered it. I know with this committee, we've kind of focused on Title I schools and those kind of things to kind of rank this kind of issue. And I'm wondering which one of those two is going to have a cleaner result. I mean, using the Title I or using this system. What are your guys' opinions of such?
I can speak a minute to what I think, and I think that we are a school-based program, and we get a lot of good information out of that school data. We get a lot of income data. Some of this other data we don't get out of that, but we get like English as a second language. We can get Title I, or we can get income of the families that go to that school. So that's what we've been using primarily. There is an opportunity to use both of these data sets, to use the school data set as well as sort of the census tract data set, or there could be, I think those are the two options, to use the school data set and the census tract data set, the TDI, or just continue using the school. I don't think I would recommend moving away from the school data set completely to the transportation disadvantaged index, but I'm sort of curious where folks are with wanting to use that data as well. And the only situations I can think of is that if there's a school, like a charter school, where a lot of people are bused to that school, the income level of the school might be very different than the income level of the community around. And we might want to look at the income level of the community around as an extra like bump up. So like if the community around the school is also a underserved community, that might help us balance that information out a little bit better. So those are some of my thoughts for, I don't want to take away from your discussion time together, but those are some of my thoughts for like, we could include it, we don't have to include it, but I wouldn't recommend completely moving away from the school-based data that we currently use.
Thank you.
It looks like Rob has his hand raised.
Thanks. Yeah, this is a sort of a technical question for Ken. I'm looking at the ArcGIS, and it seems like there's a score, an index for areas, I guess like census tracts, but also for ODOT roadway segments. What does the roadway segment index mean?
So the roadway segment is just the adjacent score of the census block group. Yeah, so it's just joined on from the adjacent census block of whichever block was higher that it touched within that 10th mile segment.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I think now might be a good time to move us into the small groups. I placed the questions in the chat. And again, and there'll be a staff person in each group to walk you through the questions and to take notes and to help with the report back. But the questions are, is this applicable to Safe Routes to School? Do we want to explore this data set more? Would there be any unintended consequences of scoring this of scoring this? And there will be a facilitated report back. So we will be collecting all this data from you all so that we can figure out how to move forward with our determining how we score the next round of projects. So any questions about that activity before Tammy puts us into our groups? Great, go ahead, Tammy. Thank you so much. Hey, everybody.
Hello.
I'm gonna just keep the recording on during this small group, just so that if anyone watches it, they can actually see one of the breakout groups. Usually I pause it. Would love to jump right in with what do you all think? Do you feel like this is applicable to Safe Routes to School? You got some nods?
Absolutely. Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yep, I agree.
Well, so far this is easy. Do we want to explore this data set a little bit more? Okay.
Yep.
Can you think of any unintended consequences of weighing this or weighing this too heavily? Like, will it negatively impact our decision-making process on the schools, or positively? Like, but I think what I'm looking for now is like, what are the potential negative impacts of this?
So for me, race can be an indicator of, potentially depressed outcomes because of structural things that have been in place for a long time. But I would be careful to weigh this heavier than like the need for free and reduced lunches, for example.
That makes sense.
Because if feasibly you could have like a Black neighborhood that's well off and a white neighborhood right adjacent to them that's not as well off, but they're going to different schools, and I would want to put the resources towards the kids who are gonna not have parents who are likely to have cars to be able to get them to school. I think that hopefully that makes sense what I'm trying to communicate.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I know that when we do our equity analysis in transit that's required under FTA, we have to do both minority and low income as a consideration. And so looking at that, it's not just a single.
Right.
And I think the Transportation Disadvantage Index does take into account income as well.
Oh, it does.
Yes.
I believe that's correct.
Okay.
So both, so it does do both, but I can't remember how much it weighs which one. I have access to the PowerPoint presentation, so we can look at
I will say that the one thing that the TDI does not do is it looks at the population over 65 and the population under 1.
Under 18, I think.
I don't remember the one being under 18. I remember being under 1. But if under 18 is in there, then that's good as well.
I'm looking. I did a screenshot of the.
Okay.
Yeah, the residents under 18 is correct.
Maybe there was a typo someplace that said that was missing the age.
And it does use the poverty rate of the 200% of the poverty level.
And number of households with no cars, no vehicles.
So it can measure some things that we can't measure about student population because we don't have that data. But just taking into account that it will be for the community around the school, not just that school data. Any other unintended consequences that folks can think of?
like if it was scored, I'm trying to think of the right way to put this. So bear with me, I'll think out loud. But if it's scored so high that an area that's had a fatality, or maybe 2 fatalities even, you know, a fatality scores lower than another area that hasn't shown a safety. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like,
So it
okay.
needs to be balanced.
Yes.
Well, it
We
would
have that
be
as-
hard. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, please finish your thought.
Well, I could see it being a difficult question to ask. You know, we've already had a child killed here. Why would this other location be prioritized when there hasn't been a crash history? We're faced with those kinds of questions often with how do we spend our resources, and we end up having to prioritize based on crash history. And so that would be a potential consequence I'd want to be aware of yeah.
Yeah, when I was going through the matrix last year, one of the things that we discussed was the areas that score higher for transportation disadvantage index also have a lower amount of pedestrian infrastructure in particular. So we thought focusing on the equity aspect, you would increase the safety aspect as well because you're improving the infrastructure.
Yeah, it is. I think that's why it's called the Transportation Disadvantage Index, because it pulls in a lot of the things that we can't measure with crash data. Some of the risk factors that we don't get with.
And even in Los Angeles County, where I worked last, you know, in 1 year, you know, there's 9 million people. We had 25 bicyclists killed and 93 pedestrians, and that's in a county of 9 million. So the numbers are very low, which is still tragic, but you want to improve it. But it's if you have somewhere with 1 and another one with 0, it doesn't say which is really safer, unfortunately.
I thought that I saw Eric try to say something earlier, so I know we don't have a whole lot of time, so I want to make sure that, and then we haven't heard from Brian yet.
Oh, I was just going to say that I agree. So that's why I didn't say anything else, is that the priority should still be, you know, where you're, you know, avoiding fatalities more than a lot of other things. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't notice. When I'm thinking out loud, I tend to close my eyes while I'm thinking out loud. So I'm sorry if I didn't catch it.
Brian, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that's been said thus far as the considerations go with using this. So I think it's a good move in the right direction for us.
I agree.
Yeah, same thing. I mean, I just feel like, you know, given the other things that were said, of course, you know, if you have a major crash area, that's what I call addressing crisis areas. But then all the other pieces that have to come together to really find, it's really addressing it where the need is, and where the need is transportation disadvantage because of socioeconomic conditions in that area. But also, you know, we talked about why lead with race. There is that whole aspect that we do need to intentionally make sure that is at least in the consideration, because if we don't intentionally do it, it won't happen.
Right.
Great. As part of the scoring criteria, we do weigh crash risk factors also very heavily, and do take into account that that income is often a link to, like Alan was saying, where the infrastructure is and where the infrastructure isn't. And so that the Transportation Disadvantage Index and using Title I income at schools also helps us weigh safety very heavily, because we know that those locations don't have a lot of that infrastructure. So great. So what I'm hearing is, like, let's look into this. Let's see how it partners with the data we're already using, not eliminating data we're already using, but how it partners with. And what I heard was we still need to weigh the school weight higher. Did I hear that correctly? So like the school demographic data should be weighed heavier than the census tract data around the school. Did I hear that? Did I not hear that?
I don't know how I feel about that because the school data is a snapshot today. Well, I guess it all is. I don't know which one. I don't know. Because you're building your infrastructure based on
Oh, I see.
longer term, right? And so if we're going off of the numbers that are enrolled in the school this year, that could change in a couple of years.
I was going to say, and you also have some districts that allow for attendance of schools that are not where you live. So you have crossover, and then you can have, you know, if you're going to do that, then you can have skewed data.
I'm not sure how, I don't know how, which I would put higher.
I think we just have to look at the weighting and just, this is something of a much longer conversation of how we would weight 2 different criteria.
Yeah, so what this will help me do is go back and be able to research the data and then be able to propose to you all a scoring criteria that you'll get before the next meeting that you'll then be able to look at and help us tweak the ending of it. So what this is telling me is based on our group is we should be including the TDI and it should be weighed heavily like the school income is weighed heavily, but maybe more balanced.
Recording in progress.
Welcome back, everyone. Chris, can you walk us through a report back?
I certainly can. And Mavis, Luis, Marcia, and Susan were in my group. And answering the question, is it applicable to safe routes? Yes. Yes to explore the data set, but one of the unintended consequences could be that it may not provide geographic balance. We might have it heavily weighed on the west side of the mountains. So that's something to keep in mind moving forward and how you would apply a geographic balance lens. And really talking about how this applies to rural communities and to coastal communities as well. There was a good idea to look at the TDI as kind of a way to do targeted outreach to certain communities that have high TDI, whether that's with the PIP program or with a full application or a construction application.
And the PIP is the project identification program where we can provide planning assistance for communities. Keep going, Chris.
Yeah, thank you. And that the other idea was that there are some questions that are being posed through the equity office for ODOT projects. And so when Nikatris presents today, those questions might be nicely incorporated into either the application or for applicants to understand moving into the process. So I'm going to pause and see if my group has anything else to add. Did I capture that well? Okay, great. All right, moving on. Leanne, do you want to go next?
Sure. In our group, we had Eric, Brian, Lonnie, and Steve. And we also think that it's applicable to safe routes, and we would like to explore this data set. Some of the, we talked a lot about not wanting to, wow, I'm not doing a very good job about this. We didn't really talk a whole lot about the unintended consequences, but we did talk a lot about how to weigh the school data set that we currently use and this data set. And I feel like people were saying this is a really important data set, and we might want to weigh it as heavily as we weigh the school data set, or I think that like our group, we ended kind of early, but there may have been some of like, or potentially even more, like this is an important data set. And so I'll pause there just to make sure that if anyone else from our group wants to add anything else. We also talked about like making sure that safety was still really important, and how these numbers help us understand safety a little bit more, but also those safety crash risk factors are still important in our scoring process. Anyone else from our group would like to add anything else?
Okay, let's go to Heidi.
Yeah, I would say we were lucky to have Ken and Rob in our group who are a little more familiar with this type of platform, but I think, yes, we would want to explore more. I think wrapping our heads around what the data actually means in terms of safe routes to school grants. So we talked a lot about maybe some of the anomalies that can come up and how we would have to watch out for that. Ken mentioned how elderly housing can play a role in the index color coding, and also college student areas tend to lend would skew some things. One thing I mentioned too, I can see this for infrastructure projects that are focused on one specific project, but in terms of education projects, like for example, the Beaverton School District has over 50 schools. And so if we have school districts applying for non-infrastructure funds, this can be problematic in terms of thinking about which schools are, how many schools are part of that index or scoring higher, and it's hard to weigh that out. So just in terms of broadly thinking about this is using it for all of the Safe Routes to School grants, we'd have to look more into that. And then just exploring the idea of like school district location versus where students actually live, and how we would have to navigate that. Anyone, did I miss anything, you guys, from my group? Okay. That's it.
Okay, I think our final group is Hannah.
Hi, yeah. We had Lauren, Noelle, and Brock, and I think a couple others who I didn't get a chance to write down. But we had a very similar conversation to what I think everybody else had. I think folks were interested in it, but pretty nervous about the fact that many schools have very large enrollment areas, and they impact a lot of students. And this is something it sounds like community paths encountered as well. But that there might be a benefit of incorporating some of the criteria, like the median family income, access to a vehicle and things like that. If we could pull out some pieces of it, it might be kind of interesting to layer on. Kind of thinking about, like, is it possible to find out whether students are attending the school at that's their neighborhood school, or use bus data to find out if it's mostly not people from the neighborhood. And as we close, Lauren was about to say something that I was excited to hear. So I was wondering, Lauren, if you could quickly finish your thought. You're muted.
Okay. Yeah, I was just saying from a tribal perspective, for those tribes who have schools on their reservations, like we do have a learning center, we do after school programs and things, that people are going to be coming from everywhere. I mean, our people are spread across the nation, but they'll be coming throughout Coos County. So that was all.
Thank you. And I think that was particularly in context of that, knowing that even if students don't attend their neighborhood school, they may go to that school, like walk to the school and use the fields or use the facilities as a community center.
Great insights. Okay, any other final comments before we take a 10-minute break for stretching? Because when we come back, we are diving into the construction program outcomes, and we don't have a breakout group, but we are going to have a group discussion about it, and we'll be building off a lot of the input that was received. Rob?
Yeah, I just wonder, like, if it would, I don't know if there was staff or intern capacity to do this, but like look back at a recent round of grants and like where we used the Title I and then like apply some of the transportation equity index scores and see like how would that have changed anything, or how well did it line up with what we came up with? Something like that.
That's great.
Could
And
be
I'm
kind of
sorry, I
interesting.
failed to mention that. That was something that Susan had mentioned in our group as well. And Rob, would you do that just to see if it would, what would be the purpose of doing that?
Just see what we can learn from it. I mean, maybe we would, I'm not sure. I just think it might be like a good like learning exercise.
Yeah.
It might show, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to add, it might identify some of those unintended consequences.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Sorry.
Ken actually did some of that analysis for me, and I didn't bring it with me, but Ken, can you speak to it kind of quickly?
Yeah, and so again, we did it with the variation from the social equity, from the Office of Social Equity, which is more or less a very similar data set. But some of the things that we found out, so out of all of the Safe Routes to School construction projects that have been funded, it was like almost 37 million out of 46 million was spent in those kind of like medium high equity focused areas. So a very high percentage of it, 56 out of 67 were within a half-mile radius of those medium high or high equity census block areas. And so as we were kind of pointing out, this program does social equity to a degree by incorporating all this title school information. And so that's why even with this data in the map, it scores really well when it comes out in the construction funding and just the project locations.
And that was just on construction. You didn't do it on education?
I did not, no.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I do see it being kind of an outlet for some of the planning, especially the PIPs. So we get really heavily involved on the region perspective when we're talking about like planning for connectivity for the greater Safe Routes to School area. That's like one like really, I think, apparent outlet that I think this data set could help with. But the rest is obviously all up to everybody else. So
Really interesting. And really good. I think that conversations of unintended consequences is something to consider, and to the point, like maybe you could tease out just some of the list. So there are things to follow up with, and we'll follow up in September and circle back on that. Great.
Yeah, so what we will do is pretty much just try to take this into consideration, and then potentially between now and September, we will be sending you a sort of like recommended scoring criteria to review. And so probably what I'll try to learn during this process is include some of it in the recommended scoring criteria that I send you. And then you'll be able to review it before the next meeting, and we'll be able to have a little bit more information then. But our hope is by the end of next meeting to have an agreed upon scoring criteria. So basically I'm taking all of your comments, even though we haven't come to like an agreement, but I'm gonna take it all and figure out, okay, what is our recommendation based on all of these questions and all this information? So that's my goal from this discussion.
And then the next part is after our break that'll help with that draft scoring criteria. So 10 minutes, if people can go stretch, get a Mountain Dew, well, maybe not, but just pep up. You've already had one, Heidi. Okay, thank you. See you at 2:41. Good. Anna, is that your new office? Congratulations, it looks lovely.
Thank you. There's still some boxes to unpack, but it's coming along.
It looks great, nice and bright.
It is much improved for my kindergartner's closet.
Okay, Leanne, are you ready to launch in?
Yep, it looks like a couple of folks dropped off for the break, and hopefully will be joining us again. I don't see, so we'll go ahead and get started because I want to remain on time, but hopefully folks will join back in. Welcome back, everybody. I will share my screen. Slide. Share screen. Let's see if it's going to cooperate. There we go. So
that's great artwork.
These are, we use artwork from the last art competition that Heidi ran with the technical assistance providers for our education side of the program. So you might notice actually I use a lot of pictures and art from the education side of the program because that's what I get really excited about. Like the crosswalk pictures that I have just look like Beatles album covers to me, which is great, but there's way more variety. So right now we're going to dig into the Safe Routes to School construction program outcomes. I've got about 10 minutes of information to share, and then we've got about 30 minutes of discussion planned. So I'm going to jump into it so we can get through my 10 minutes. So I wanted to start us off by doing a review of what we actually talked about in January of this year. I think it was January of this year or January of last year, where we did a review of what the construction program looks like so far. So these are all the squares are places where we've funded projects or we've funded planning processes since the construction program was created in 2018. So we had a couple of questions about, do we fund things on the coast? And this map shows that we do get a lot of coastal communities applying, and we're able to fund a lot of those coastal communities. But the blue are the planning processes, the yellow are the construction processes, the construction grants, and the green is the rapid response grants. So we've got a lot of projects going, about 70 construction projects, about 30 Safe Routes to School plans. Since we began this program. Here's all my Beatles album covers of the crossing improvements that we're doing across the state. We're also doing a lot of curb ramps, walkway improvements, and lighting, as well as school zone indicators. So that's where the funds are headed so far of the projects we've funded. So we have a lot of questions around, hey, did our scoring matrix work? So upon first analysis, it looks like yes, we are funding all Title I schools. 83% of funds are spent within a priority safety corridor, which we'll talk in a little bit about what the actual definition of what that means. But it's where the risk of a crash is increased because of certain things that are on the ground, or like the speed, the crossing distance, the history of crashes, and the average annual daily traffic. So 83% of the funds are spent where we know the risk is high. 62% of the funds will go to schools with the highest percentage of low-income families. 46% of the funds are spent outside of an MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization, meaning that we have a good urban and rural balance in this program. And 35% of the funds are spent within populations of communities under 5,000. So we know that even our tiny communities here in Oregon are able to compete in this program. So these are some of the areas where we've been trying to make sure that these are the things that we're prioritizing. A little bit more about the background. So this chart shows the funding, where the funding went for the last cycle. So Region 1 in Oregon got 22% of the funds, Region 2 got 38%, Region 3 got 28% of the funds, and then Region 4 and Region 5 got 6 and 6 both got 6% of the funds. And that kind of balances out with where the Title I schools are located in Oregon. So Region 1 has 22% of the Title I schools in Oregon. Region 2 has 38%. Region 3 actually has 17% of the Title I schools. And Region 4 has 11% of the Title I schools. And Region 5 has 10% of the Title I schools. So we see that Region 3 is getting more funding than their percentage of Title I schools, and Region 4 and Region 5 are getting a little bit less. Or in the last round, that's how it played out. A little bit more of this analysis. Basically what I did is I went and I looked through and said, hey, if we didn't score these things, what would happen? So if we didn't score project readiness, 94% of the projects would remain the same. If we didn't score crash risk factors, 84% of the projects would have remained the same. If we didn't score disadvantaged communities, 77% of the projects would have remained the same. Here, it's good to note that like we've really advertised this program as like a safety and like people know what the scoring is, so they're applying with applicants based on that. So I think if we did stop scoring disadvantaged communities altogether, we'd get a way different applicant pool. But so it's good to note that in each of these things as well. But where the final one to note is that if we made just small tweaks here and there, about 82% of the projects would remain the same. So so this gives us a general idea of like what we're working with. And I did this analysis to look at Region 4 and Region 5 because we got a lot of comments about, hey, Region 4 and Region 5 are lower than their percentage of Title I schools. And so really the thing to note here is that if we did not score crash risk factors at all, there would have been 5 new projects from Region 4 and Region 5. So in Region 4 and Region 5, they actually generally have fewer crash risk factors. So those are just all kind of interesting things to know. I also wanted to show you this map again, which is the racial demographics of schools in Oregon. So in Oregon, our schools are 35% kids of color. So what this map shows is the blue dots and squares are the schools that are above average, so above the state average, schools with higher than 35, higher the school population than 35% are kids of color. So you see that actually it's spread out across the state. We hear a lot that, oh, that'll just be in Region 1. No, actually, Ontario, Nissa, Malin, Milton Freewater, Echo, Warm Springs, Phoenix, Ashland, like our kids of color actually are spread out across the state. And the squares with the circle around it are also our high low income schools. So the highest percentage of low income students are at those squares with the circle around it. So we see a lot of correlation between those two data sets. So I'm going to jump into the overview of your homework. You all did this homework, so you remember what the questions are, and I'm just going to move along to the next slide. So what we learned from your homework, and thank you all for turning it in, is that in general, our scoring criteria from folks' perspective seem to be working. Generally happy with how it turned out, they mitigate many risk factors, gives applicants an opportunity to address red flags. The scoring is simplistic and relevant, it fits the need, and it focuses on equity. What we also learned is that we would even like more of a focus on equity. Equity should be a larger piece. Our new overarching principle of racial equity needs to be in consideration. And things like extending the date if the applicant pool is low, extending the date of the due date, like things like that will help us keep our communities in need at the forefront of this program. A little bit more about the summary of the homework. A couple of things to highlight are that how we apply the final lenses at the end is a challenge. It's a little bit more subjective. There is not enough funding to go around. All of these projects are great and we would love to fund them all, and we just don't have enough funding to go around. There's also some comments about the dense area. some areas are dense with high equity needs, and some areas have little to no safe routes to school infrastructure. And these actually may be different areas. So, so just something else to note that came up in the homework. We also had several questions, so I apologize for all the words on this slide, the next 3 slides. I'd like to go through each of the questions individually really quickly and just read through them so that everyone can hear the questions and everyone can hear the answers. So all focus area implementation work with existing data. Is there any other way to be aware of consideration needs? So the TDI, the Transportation Disadvantaged Index that we learned about today is sort of like one of those other existing data sets. So we definitely can look at stuff like that. But in general, I'm not aware of any large data sets that we're not currently looking at or using or considering for this program. So I'm open to ideas. So I wanted to put that out there. We aim for the score to be as quantitative as possible. What part of COVID will play in the eligibility criteria? So just like the last round, we are prepared to give additional time and make exceptions and exemptions if COVID makes it hard for schools to participate. So we're prepared to be flexible on that. We were flexible last time. We're prepared to be flexible again. We want this program to be useful and meaningful for local communities and are willing to work with whatever's happening at the time. What is a ground assessment? So active transportation liaisons do a desk scope or in-person visit to the site to look for red flags. And we generally focus this ground assessment on like the 150% list of trying to understand what is on the ground. And we're looking to see if what folks put in the application matches up with what we're seeing on the ground. Are all potential projects reviewed in person in order to determine being selected? No, again, sometimes it's what we call a desk scope, where we look at the Google Maps. Generally, we do that for places that we already have a general idea of what's there. Maybe we've been there before, just not recently. So there are instances where we don't actually go to the applicant location. The next one is, what is a priority safety corridor and does it only apply to ODOT facilities? And is it similar to high crash corridor? So the priority safety corridor is defined in rule, and it's intended to describe roads with the highest crash risk. It's not limited to ODOT facilities, it's any facility. This is the definition in the rule of what is a priority safety corridor. So it is where the posted speed or 85th percentile is 40 miles per hour or greater. Bottom line, that anything with 40 miles an hour or greater is considered a priority safety corridor in this program. Or 2 or more of the following exist. The speed limit is 30 miles per hour or greater. There are more than 2 lanes or a crossing distance of greater than 30 feet. There's 12,000 or greater annual average daily traffic, and it has a demonstrated history of crashes related to school traffic. So if 2 or more of those are present, that's also a priority safety corridor. So, and this is used in a couple different ways. This can be used to reduce the match from 40% to 20%. If this is the case, this also carries some weight in our scoring criteria to try to help with those areas that are at high risk of crashes. And we pulled this data from the All Roads Transportation Safety Program, learning from engineers what exists in general in in areas that have high risk for crashes. For local projects, could we use the active transportation needs inventory prioritization rather than the priority safety corridor to include more facilities that have high crash rates? Right now, the active transportation needs inventory is actually just for ODOT facilities. They use a lot more data that we don't have for local roads. So that tool can be used for ODOT facilities, but cannot be used for this like local grant program because we don't have that data set. The priority safety corridor is in general what we use because they provide us with that local data. Could the SRAC see more detailed scoring of projects, the average of all the scores for priority area, or prior to the recommendation process, and potential application of additional lenses? This is something that we can probably provide. We're working now on an application database that will make it more possible for us to share accurate scoring information quickly during this process. So, stay tuned. Yes, definitely on an individual project level, when you're reviewing projects, if you want this, let me know, I can pull it for you. But downloading it all as a large data set was really hard in the way we were processing information the last time, and we're creating an application database to try to make that easier. It's not in place yet, so I don't know for sure we'll be able to use it, but I'm hoping to be able to provide you a large data set with this information for the next round. Are some of the safety points giving more weight to towns with large populations? I'm not necessarily sure. This may be true, but our system of lenses seems to compensate in that small communities compete really well in this program. So that's the best answer I could have for that one. Could we have more time between when the applications are scored, put together, and when the SRAC meets to discuss? Absolutely, we're planning that into the next round. We had some data errors and hard times the last round. We're going to plan more time so that can be more seamless with more time for analysis and sharing of all the information. And could we encourage coordination with any other project occurring in the same time area within the same time frame? I said yes. In project delivery, we can definitely encourage that. It would be more complicated in the scoring process and would need to be discussed. So if it's something that we want to score based on, are you leveraging with another project, that's kind of a different conversation that we've had before and decided no on. But if we want to bring that back in, we could have that discussion again. I'll pause for a second to see if there was any questions that came up in the chat.
I have a question, Leanne. I am afraid that it's very specific, and so if we need to talk about it offline, that's totally fine too. But I had the other half of the question. Noella mentioned that was her asking about the ODOT facilities, and I had the other half of the question of, I'm curious if how would schools rank when there are a lot of speeding and near misses, but the streets are marked to be lower than 30, and there aren't necessarily crashes, but there are a lot of near misses. And so I'm wondering how would they compete in that area, or if that area is weighted very heavily?
Well, yeah. The applicant provides us with all of the data, and they can provide the actual what speed everyone actually goes versus what is posted. So you can sort of the 85th percentile speed if that's higher than what's posted, but we don't track, we don't score near misses. We just sort of score those safety risk factors that were used from the All Roads Transportation Safety Program. But we will, during our group discussion, get into some of the suggestions that folks came up with, and the speed is definitely one of them.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. All right, so Chris is gonna help me with the next part. I'll sort of introduce the little visuals that I came up with for what I think is a good way to have this discussion, and then Chris can help me lead it. And then Chris, let me know when you want me to turn the slides off so that we can see people's faces.
Okay, great.
So we had a lot of really great suggestions, and thank you all. This is exactly what we were looking for through this process. So what I did is I pulled out all the suggestions and made a little notation next to each of them. This little green guy with the eyeglass, that symbol indicates that this is something that staff would really like to investigate and figure out how to include in our scoring criteria, and then propose that to you before our September meeting. So we would like to see if it's possible. These are great ideas. We'd like to see if this is possible. And and it seemed like most people who were submitting homework would also be on that same page. This smiley, these faces right here for feedback are things that are great ideas that people had that we're not sure if everyone would agree with or not. So these are things that staff can investigate, but we'd like to hear from the larger group. Is everyone interested in this, or just a few people? Like, what's the interest level here, so that when we do propose the scoring criteria to you, we'll already know in advance, like most people already like this. We want to propose something to you that you'll like. So we want to have some discussion around those items. And then we've got a couple of not recommended. It means that staff does not recommend, meaning that it's like it's like indicated in statute or indicated in rule that we need to prioritize these things. And so it's not recommended that we reevaluate this at this time, because it's kind of built into the program. So those are the three symbols that you'll see. And this is our first slide. As you'll note, that most things on here, I think that everyone would in general agree with based on the homework responses, and that staff is ready and willing to investigate and include, if possible, in the next scoring matrix that we send out for you to look at. I'll pause for a second here.
And there's, I would say for here, we want to know is, are there any concerns with staff investigating these? Does anything jump out? And for those who haven't had an opportunity to weigh in on the homework, is there something you'd like to add to this? And that's not necessarily that staff, the caveat is staff may not have a chance to respond, whether they can investigate or they have to think about it. But for right now, Leanne, do you want to just walk through these quickly? You just pause. What do you want?
So actually, let's pause and read the slide and let me know, are there any, let us know, are there any concerns with us investigating this and seeing if it's possible to include, and if it is, including these as part of our scoring criteria.
And I just want to emphasize again, because the SRAC does not score applications, this is where the influence of scoring occurs for the SRAC.
Steve.
Yeah, so the only one that I see on this slide that raises a little concern is this overly simplified BMI ranking.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to use that, it needs to be a more advanced than just the height weight. Height weight is something that can be skewed by many, many different factors. Mm-hmm. Someone who is a 7% body fat bodybuilder, but their weight, because they are a bodybuilder, in relation to their height, would be classified as obese under the standard height weight BMI chart. So that's just the only thing that I see on there, that if you're going to use such as, that's one that is not the most accurate measure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's a really good point. In a couple of other things that I've done using census data, I've used like instances of heart disease and like type 2 diabetes. Like is another way to do that I could look into and see if we can get that type of data.
Yeah, I think that would be a more accurate assessment of general health across an area than just a BMI index.
Are there other thoughts about that? That was a great point, Steve. I'm not seeing any hands raised. Okay, Leanne, why don't we continue on? Anything else that has concerns?
Oh, sorry, back to that slide. There we go.
Okay.
So I raised my hand. Sorry, I just wanted to clarify under addressing transportation disparities. I think the first two bullets, I think I submitted this, and that income is heavily weighted in comparison to these other vulnerabilities. That wasn't meant to be like its own thing. It was in regard to the English language and chronic absenteeism. We just have the Title I like scale, and then we had those two just with a points or no points. And so I was suggesting just prioritizing them more in line with the income, not to change the income one. Just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Okay, let's move on, Leanne.
Actually, could I jump in a sec?
Sure.
Yeah.
I have a question about the address both barriers and hazards. Leanne, do you have any thoughts about like how that would be? Would it be like a narrative or like qualitative data where the person applying would talk about that?
This is, I believe, just a kind of a wordsmithing thing to say, like, when we say barriers, maybe say barriers and hazards as part of like the narrative portion of the application. So it wouldn't really change the scoring. It's just like, hey, when we say barriers, can we also say barriers and hazards? And I don't have anything against changing those words. So it wouldn't necessarily affect the scoring. It was more like a wordsmith.
Okay, thanks.
Brian, I think you added that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was my comment, just to broaden it out, because oftentimes, when we're just focusing on the barrier, which was the original wording, we're not looking at the other aspect of, what constitutes a hazard and how that impacts the way people use the roadway. They're not necessarily a barrier in the way, but it's super hazardous. So just thinking about it from the context of broadening.
Great.
And this, Steve, just one clarification. My display, I'm assuming the last two words on that bottom is transportation options, but all I'm seeing is the portion that's above the cross on the T.
Okay. I might read out the next one just because I feel like that might be better for folks if I just do a quick read aloud. And Kim's got her hand up.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. I'm up under the racial equity, where it's talking about looking at the demographics within a quarter to a half a mile. We're not using that for our boundary, right? I mean, the walk zone is a mile.
Yeah, this is something that I'm not sure if I can I don't know if I can get that data or not, but I would be happy to look into it and see if it is possible to get and use. That's correct. We use 1 mile, but we add additional points right now in our scoring criteria if the project is within a quarter mile of the school or within a half a mile of a school, but we don't correlate that to where the low income students are. It's just a different question. So I don't actually know if we can find this out or not with privacy of student population and them probably not sharing with me where students live. But I thought it was worth investigating. Great.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other.
Yeah, keep us moving because we've got some juicy questions coming up.
Yeah.
This was a great slide, but I'm like, let's keep going. Y'all are gonna like some of these other ones. So for this one, staff thinks that most people would agree with and is willing to investigate this proximity to school. So instead of a quarter and half a mile, consider whether the project is within the school's walk zone or has a hazard busing area, kind of like what Kim was saying. It could be half a mile away, but outside of the enrollment boundary and may not directly serve the students of the school. So right now we don't look at student enrollment boundary whenever we look at quarter mile, half mile, and it's been a little bit harder to get that data set as a statewide data set. So we're trying to find information that most people could access easily. So this would be an investigation of like, can we get that data set? Can it be accessed easily at a statewide level so that all applicants can get it easily? And if so, can we use it as part of our scoring criteria? So that's why we've got the investigative guide next to that one. School type. We currently give points for elementary and middle schools, but not for high schools. And that is as part of how the program was set up. It was set up by the legislature to prioritize elementary and middle schools. So high schools are still able to compete because the number of points that we don't give high schools isn't low enough that they wouldn't be able to get funded at some point. But it would mean that they'd have to be pretty high in the other things in order to compete. So so that's not recommended at this time because it goes a little bit goes against the nature of the statute and of the rule. So we've got speed, which we would love your feedback on, and bike ped crashes, which we would love your feedback on. And the speed question is, consider dropping 25 miles per hour and 30 miles per hour. Consider dropping to 25 miles per hour and 30 miles per hour. So for kids, speeds of 25 or more are considered very dangerous, and anything over 30 miles per hour seems to be a priority. So right now, I believe it's 30 miles per hour and 40 miles per hour. I have to go back and double check what it is now at this very moment. But dropping it would allow more people to get points for this category, which I'm definitely open to, but it would change things enough that I feel like the committee needs to give me a thumbs up. Yeah, we're into more people getting these safety points. Right now it's a little bit more narrow, like it prioritizes higher speeds. And I think that what I would potentially do here is just create a larger scale to where you could get some points for 25, but still have it incrementally up to 40. So I would probably provide more of a scale if the committee was interested in this one. But what it means is that more communities will get more points for safety.
So I think, Noelle, you had this point in your homework. Is there anything else you want to say about this?
I don't think so. I like the idea of a scale to maybe, right now it's 30 and 35.
There it is, thanks.
And I feel like maybe there's some room for still some points at 25, because I feel like a 25 mile per hour road in a place where we're expecting kids to walk is still a safety hazard in some ways, or could be. So, and this was also with input from our Metro Safety program manager.
Okay. Are there concerns with Leanne exploring this for potential inclusion in the scoring? I mean, is this a red flag for anybody? Dropping the speed. So Lanny and then Kim.
I'm thinking out loud, so bear with me here. Does this mean that basically every application would end up getting points for this? Because how many locations are there out there that are posted lower than 25?
I don't know the answer to that, but a lot more people would get more points if we lowered it to 30.
Just doesn't seem like there's a lot out there that's posted at 20 without it being a temporary school zone, right? Which you wouldn't use. So it just seems like it's giving everybody points essentially. And then that way you're not really prioritizing anybody. Does that make sense?
That was sort of why we hadn't done it in the past, but open to new thoughts. Two things come to mind. One is that we know that more projects would be more competitive in Region 4 and Region 5 if we dropped the speed zone. And we know that in some places, I've gotten 2 calls in the past year where people say like, this program seems to disincentivize us from lowering our speed limit because it will reduce the amount of points that we'll get on your application. I don't know if we want to do that or not, but that's something I've gotten a call twice. I have not heard of any communities that have actually done that, like not reduced the speed limit so that they could have more points here. But that's something that I've heard. And what I've said is that, well, it's across the board. So people who are lowering, like it's still fair in that everyone is held to the same standard. So you're not disadvantaged over another community who's lowering their speed limit and is also, anyway, that's how I've talked to people about it. And I've told them they can submit public comment to this group to talk more about that if they'd like to.
Let's go to Rob.
It's interesting about the speed limit one because we're looking forward to lowering a lot of speed limits in Eugene, but as a lot of people know, like just lowering a speed limit doesn't necessarily lower the speed that people drive. I mean, it can help. I'm sort of an optimist on that, but I also know it doesn't necessarily make a difference. And I think that Safer Routes to School funding, if it's a street that's on a school route or adjacent to a school, could actually help to get the driving speed down. However, so, you know, one thing to think about is the extra points we have it. I think it's a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit is one of like the other things, and it could, you could make that 30-mile speed limit or 30-mile-an-hour 85th percentile speed.
It currently
might be like
is, you can choose either one of those.
Oh, I thought that was just for the 40, not the 30. It's for both. Okay, sorry. Okay, great. I didn't realize that. I just have a couple other broader sort of questions or things to think about. One, and they have to do with the ODOT. I guess $10 million of state funds are going to be used for this program and to pay for Safer Routes to School infrastructure projects and ODOT facilities, right? Do I have that right?
No, say that again. None of those.
$10 million. ODOT will no longer be applying for projects out of this funding. But my question is ODOT, is this committee going to be involved in selecting the ODOT projects? And are they going to have to comply with the same criteria for project selection so that there's this sort of equity lens applied to the ODOT, or will they have their own equity lens that's just sort of different?
I'm gonna pause on that one just because the answer gets really long and complicated, and I got to get these next couple of slides.
Got it.
And the short answer is no. This committee does not choose the ODOT projects, which are actually funded with a different pot of funding. Not to get too complicated about it, it's like this committee's for this Safe Routes to School fund, and the federal, there are some federal funds that will be used to fund the ODOT projects. So some of the criteria is the same, like they need to be within a 1 mile radius of a school. The school has to support the project, but the project selection will be a little bit different because, like I said before, we actually have more data for ODOT right-of-way than we have right-of-way, so we can use better data to select projects. So that's the answer.
And then just one other thing, like I really appreciate the analysis you showed earlier about how things might have been different when just showing the distribution of projects, and then how things might have been a little different if the criteria were different. And I don't know, like it seems to me, and this could be wrong, that ODOT facilities are more likely to be in rural areas. And so it's possible, I wonder if it's possible that what we're going to see in the future is even fewer small town and non-MPO projects coming out of this program, but more of the ODOT funding. And I just think that's something we should think about and be aware of going in, so people aren't like, oh my gosh, you know, look what happened.
Good.
Leanne, before we go to the next slide, I just wanted to circle back to Lanny. Lanny, your point that, you know, you might water it down so that everyone's getting points and it doesn't really decipher. I'm just paraphrasing. If there are extra points that Leanne, does that address some of your concern about that?
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Yeah, I was just thinking out loud and wondering if that was the reason. And again, I'm new to this committee, but if that was a reason that it started up higher instead of just automatically giving. Yeah, but I like the way you put it. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, Leanne, let's keep moving.
So we also have bike ped crashes. So update the bike ped crash of any kind, right? Right now we have 2 ways you can receive points for crashes, and one is if there's a crash and an injury, a crash and or crash and injury involving a pedestrian and a bicyclist, and then another set of points for if there's a fatality. And the suggestion was to include serious injury with fatality. And the reason why we haven't done that in the past is because the definition of serious injury can get complicated, and like how to prove the serious injury can get complicated. And so we kind of simplified it, and we're like, crash injury gets this amount of points and a fatality gets this amount of points. But I'd be absolutely happy to dig into that again and see if there's a way to do that in a better way, if folks have a strong opinion about including serious injury in with fatality.
So I think, let's see if anybody has their hand raised. Lanny, do you have something on that?
My hand was still raised from before, sorry.
Okay, Rob? Is that a new hand?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's a new hand. Sorry. So Leanne, I don't know if I was following this right, but are we relying on ODOT data for?
No,
the
we're
crash?
relying on local data.
Okay.
Data doesn't
So
come
more
out until
anecdotal.
2 years
Okay, I
after,
can
so
see.
it's somewhat anecdotal.
Got it. Right, because I know ODOT, has that data typically, but it can also be, take a long time to get it.
Mhm.
So, okay, thank you.
Although we do like ask for, we can ask for backup for fatalities around like sheriff's reports, things like that. We can get that a lot quicker than the 2 years from waiting for the ODOT data. And it's been hard to get the serious injury stuff figured out.
Mm-hmm. So Leanne, if you're not hearing any red flags, is it safe to say you'll be investigating this further?
Yeah, so it sounds like
Okay.
we should investigate both of these. Like, we're not hearing huge
Yep.
red flags. We actually have one more slide to go, which might be the longer conversation. So I would like to hear from Susan really quickly. If we take a little bit more time, can we bump you to the next meeting?
Totally fine. Also, the slides pretty much speak for themselves. It's just highlighting the fact that we're doing an online open house the 15th of September to the end of October.
And Heidi, can you check in with Nikatris and see if we've got her on for 3:25.
She's on.
She's on.
Okay. Okay, so let's try to wrap this up pretty quickly. We might run a couple minutes late, Nikatris. I'm really sorry, but we'll get through this last slide. So our thing that we want to know if there's any red flags against exploring is consider updating the $2 million limit lens, especially for projects that score high on safety and or equity and or serve a high density of students. So right now we have a $2 million maximum lens that we put across where no community can get more than $2 million in this process. Do we want to look into what it would look like to change that lens?
And changing it would be to increase it or decrease it. I think the comment was to increase it.
It would be to increase it, yeah. So that so certain communities wouldn't have the $2 million maximum. Nope, sorry, that's not what it is. Let's let Noelle speak for herself.
Yeah.
Sorry, I can
Thanks,
weigh
Noelle.
in. Yeah, and sorry, a lot of these are mine. I had a lot of comments, so thanks for hearing these all out. In putting this in, I guess my question is, and again, I'm fairly new to the committee, but my understanding of the lenses were that we could apply them, but it seems like this one is one that we just apply. And so I guess what I was interested in is, could we consider whether to apply this lens instead of just, yes, there's a limit of 2 million. And part of my interest in this is connected to a previous comment I had about better understanding of the scoring of each project, so that we could say, wow, when we apply this lens, the amount of money that's going to high safety projects goes down, or high level of equity, some of that nuance we would better understand before applying this lens. Because I think last time, if we put that limit, new projects pop up that scored significantly lower than a project that went to another jurisdiction. So I wouldn't want a special exception for any certain jurisdiction. It's more like, could we use some nuance on that application of the lens?
that's really helpful and really helpful clarification. And I want to say one thing, which is that the committee does not have to apply the $2 million lens. We provided a couple different options of like, if we didn't apply the $2 million lens, here's what we would fund. If we did apply the $2 million lens, here's what we would fund. And if we did apply a couple of these other lenses on the projects right at the cut line, here's what we would fund and how that looks different. In general, the committee has applied the $2 million lens, but does not have to. They may apply it. So maybe we don't need a discussion here, but
let's see what Steve. Yeah.
So I would say that I'm not opposed to it being considered where you could have a project over 2 million, but where you start going to larger projects, and I know this becomes more complex over time, is then if you are a jurisdiction or an agency that receives a larger allocation in 1 year, that is also taken into consideration in following funding cycles. And I say that in consideration of having been through numerous iterations of funding selection on the transit side. And sometimes there are players who have the ability to leverage consistently the lion's share of the money. And even at times, there have been cases where they bargained to take all of the money in a year just because of the magnitude of a project, with promises that they would not come back and take any for the following X number of years, except for then that program went away. It was the enhanced money. So everybody who didn't get a project funded that year also didn't get any money the rest of the years because that project just didn't exist. So in the aspect of equity and making sure that we provide resources to as many people as possible, also just keeping that in mind as we go further down the road. Great.
I want to make one clarifying comment, which is that there is actually in rules saying that no project can be larger than $2 million. So that will still stay the same. The project maximum needs to be 2 million, but in this case, a community could apply for two $2 million projects, 2 different projects. And right now the lens, it would still be possible for the committee to decide to not fund both $2 million projects, even if they scored highly. The committee could apply this lens, but they don't have to. But you don't have to. And I would imagine that the discussion would be exactly what Steve and Noelle are kind of saying right now. That would be our discussion during that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to move to the last one, which is that I would like to investigate. It seems like most people would be okay with this one. And so I'm just looking for red flags if we shouldn't investigate this. We have another optional lens that we can look at as a tiebreaker to say, like, if this person received funding in the last cycle and is still working on a project, we might not give them funding again. The other aspect, the flip side to that is, or could we consider applying sort of like a greater lens to a project that has been applied for repeatedly and has just like been on the cut line that whole time, and maybe it's time to fund them, to really encourage people to keep applying even if they're not getting funded. So I'm open to this. I think it's a great idea. I would like to investigate it and see how to incorporate it. Are there any red flags with that?
My red flag is I missed a period. It's punctuation. So that's my red flag.
Thank you all. I'm going to skip over Susan's slides. We might be able to come back to them if we have a little bit of time. And I'm going to jump right into Nikatris's presentation. Thank you so much for being here, Nikatris. And thank you all for that invaluable information. It'll really help me create a scoring matrix that I think you'll all see yourselves in, and we'll have a really good discussion next in our September meeting to review that and approve that and tweak it. Nikatris, if you could introduce yourself and let me know when you would like your slides to advance.
Absolutely. So, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Let's just pull up the- All right, so I am Nikatris Perkins. I am the Assistant Director of Social Equity at ODOT. And today I'm just going over some of the things that are happening in the Office of Social Equity, kind of providing an overview of like where we are, what we're doing, and then answering any questions you might have. The next slide really just has a lot of words on it. I do know that. And as you look at the next slide, you will see that it really does give an overview of everything that we're doing in chunks. So on the left-hand side is the definition of equity. This definition is the definition that was put out by the governor's office. We adopted the definitions for diversity, equity, and inclusion from the governor's office. Oftentimes, entities, organizations, businesses get caught up on creating the definition that they don't start moving. And so the definition from the governor's office is sound, it's good, it's very complete. And so we are using that. So that's the definition. On the right-hand side of the slide, you'll see three things. The very top is the way the Office of Social Equity is being used. It's very important for us to be clear that we don't have our own mission or vision or something separate from ODOT. Really what we're doing is ensuring that social equity is embedded to the things that already exist. So as we move, social equity policy is not going to come out. Instead, we're going to do policy analysis of all the policies we have, both the ones that we have internally and then the ones that we use that come from the Department of Administrative Services, or maybe like if there's ORS rules that we really need that really do affect how we're able to move equity. We're thinking about how we can shift those instead of creating something new. That also means that the way we move forward, we'll roll out a social equity blueprint, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But it's just we're embedding things and not creating something new that people are going to have to go to a separate space and look at. In doing that, we're committed to 4 general, I would say buckets. And so this describes each of them. One of them is our own workforce. The second one is the economic opportunities, specifically for businesses that are owned by BIPOC, people who identify as BIPOC, which does include tribal nations, sovereign nation, Asian Pacific Islander, Latino, Latinx businesses, as well as those owned by women, and others who have been historically and currently marginalized. And we're thinking about engagement and moving past informing people about what ODOT is doing, but getting to the point where both involving and consulting populations that have most likely been excluded or marginalized in our decision making, to include budgeting or where something happens, that their voices are utilized. And then finally, we're looking at climate justice in terms of equity. The bottom of the slide just gives you an overall like where we're trying to get. So we are prioritizing diversity, equity, inclusion by identifying and addressing systemic barriers by 2030, right? So like this is not we're going to keep going forever. We will, like as an office, it's an office that's needed in ODOT to continue to do business differently. And also we're very clear that we need to have some goals and want to see some very significant shifts, and that'll happen by 2030. The next slide tells you exactly what that should look like. So these are impact statements that really give you an idea of what you will see as a result of us doing this work between now and 2030. The first thing is that our policies, processes, and procedures will promote diverse workforce. And so again, that's embedded in the things that we do, that we have strong partnerships with businesses that have not historically been able to access ODOT contracts, consulting, being able to bid, being on price agreements. That process has not necessarily been easy or accessible. It's not been accessible for businesses throughout the state. And looking at all ODOT projects, really thinking about projects and programs, really thinking about how they provide, think about equity in their risk assessment, Thinking about how all voices are integrated. So just kind of how I talked about the utilization of voices that are marginalized or historically excluded. We want to make sure that our transportation benefits and investments really benefit neighborhoods, again, that have not traditionally, historically, or currently been thought about in terms of benefit and burden impact, and make sure that they're not systematically, so consistently, right? Like it's happened once and then it just is like a continuous cycle of being burdened more than they are benefiting from our projects. We want to shift that. And then finally, to identify industry and program partners that we can hold accountable, to be very clear about who they are. So a lot of the things we do at ODOT are not necessarily done by the employees of ODOT in terms of actually doing our construction projects or some of our design. Like we do a lot of things with a lot of consultants and a lot of other organizations, a lot of suppliers. And so we need to make sure that people who are a part of ODOT by proxy or contract are also aligned with our different social equity desires, and making sure that these barriers are not true as we move to 2030. The next slide goes into just a really high level social equity lens that we're using. This social equity lens is very broad on purpose. And so how we're using this right now is that there are a number of programs that have started to use these 4 questions. These 4 questions can easily be broken out into 15, 20, 45 questions. We're creating a protocol right now to help people understand how they can use these questions. But we made it this broad because there's no part of the agency that should think that social equity is not part of what they're thinking about. So I'll give an example. Culverts, which are not necessarily, culvert program didn't think about how, what social equity has to do with us. We talked about disaster and resiliency and what that looks like for water to flow. Like that's a problem. And it's been ignored in some neighborhoods. It's not mapped very well in some neighborhoods. When you look at those neighborhoods, you think about where they are, and they're usually high social equity index areas. And so it's an opportunity for them to really think about that very specifically in terms of how they're mapped, like we know where they are, how they are constructed, and how they are maintained in those areas. And that being the social equity lens that the part of the social equity lens that they use. So these very high level questions are broken down for different departments in different ways, but at the end of the day, no matter what somebody's doing and think about social equity, they should be able to tie them back to one of or all of these 4 questions. The high social equity index area is very basic. I know you all have been using the active transportation needs index inventory. And so like in that, this index area doesn't take into consideration crowding in homes. It also doesn't take into consideration if whether or not a home has a car, or it doesn't take into consideration young people. The reason why is because these 5 on the next slide, in terms of the index or high social equity index areas, it only takes into consideration 5 things that we know are in all areas. And so we're looking at age over 65, you're looking at language proficiency, we're looking at race and ethnicity, we're looking at abilities, and we're looking at poverty. And so when you look at that map, which on the next slide, when you look at that map, you're understanding that the darker the blue, the more those are, you see cross sections of those populations. We use these 5 because no matter what program you're looking at, you can put other layers on top of it, but you should never need to take layers away from it in order to really think about a program. So we're talking about DMV putting kiosks, they should be thinking about these 5 things in the cross sections of populations and spaces. When we're talking about culverts, when we're talking about paving, when we're talking about safe routes to school, and again, you have another layer, right? So you're thinking about young people, and you're also thinking about cars, and you're also thinking about crowding, which makes sense. It's another layer, but this is the base layer. So we're currently working on turning this into something that, again, every program can use, and that is interactive, not just for ODOT, but accessible by the public as well, and thinking about the state and social equity. And then on the next slide, I just go into the levers of impact for us. It's really important as we move through this that it's very clear that everybody who works at ODOT, for ODOT, and with ODOT is important to us shifting the way we do work. Social equity is not something that everyone was actively doing. Social equity is not something that people have actively thought about in their lives or careers. And so in order for us to shift our programs, policies, and projects, thinking about social equity in everything we do, all of these people and spaces are involved. So it's people, right? It's the OTC, So the Transportation Commission needs to be thinking about this, senior leaders and managers. It's also thinking about how we work with communities. So we're moving forward. We just, as of July 1st, there is an equitable engagement compensation policy, so that we know that when we are engaging people in spaces and they're not being compensated by the places that they work, and we are very dedicated to making sure we're consulting populations that have not consistently sat at the table to make the decisions that impact their lives, that they're being compensated for their contribution to those spaces. And so that policy, again, has just gone into effect, and that we can't engage community and say we're serious about it if we don't have that. And so thinking about that, the learning environment, and how we are making sure people connect the things that we do, especially because some of them are so long-term and their day-to-day lives. And then also thinking about data and our organizational culture, and extra representation, as well as, again, the people who work with and for ODOT. And so data, organizational culture, and all the people who are involved in that are the levers for us to really make significant impact. The last slide really just shows kind of our next steps and where we are. So Office of Social Equity has been in office for a year, and we are moving quickly and also not quick enough. So there's some people who are like, this is going way too fast and I can't catch up, and what are we supposed to do now? And some people who are like, why haven't we shifted everything? So that will probably always be true about just equity in general in terms of how it moves. But we are moving, right? So we spent the last year really socializing equity. There are many parts of the agency who had never thought about it and did not connect equity to what they do on a day-to-day basis or the outcomes of the agency. And so as we transition out of socializing, we're not transitioning in a way where we're not continuing these conversations. We're just now moving into a place where they need to be normalized. So it needs to become part of everything we do. In doing that, we will roll out the social equity blueprint in the next couple of months. So it should be out by October 1. And it's a document that really connects transportation to social equity for all of our teams to provide a lens, an index, a resource plan, engagement toolkit. And the reason that is not out now, right? Like, I definitely have been in spaces where I will create a plan and that people can use it right away. The reason that did not happen that way is because another place that I've seen equity get hung up is, well, two places. One, in middle management, because it feels top down, and then it gets stuck in a place where people aren't able to implement it well, and not well because they're not capable, well because they just don't know exactly what to do. You can absolutely ask a question. Do you want me to stop talking while you ask, or you want me to finish this slide while you ask? Or is it the last slide?
Luis, I think you can go ahead and ask a question if you'd like.
Hello, Luis Ornelas, OTSC member. I would like to know how Safe Routes to School is doing with equity compared to the ODOT in general.
Okay, I can definitely answer that question. Is it okay if I finish these few things? Does that work for you, Luis?
Yeah.
Okay, so it gets caught there, and it also gets caught because people can't see themselves in the plan. And so in this blueprint, we spent a lot of time with our resident engineers, with our tech centers, with our planning teams, with our GIS, like we're spending time with all the teams, with our maintenance crews, with DMV's front counters, managers, to talk about what this can look like so that when there is a blueprint, one, it's not shocking or surprising, and two, people see themselves in it, and they don't feel like equity is happening to them by force, but instead that they were engaged in the process, and they can implement it well. And so that's why it's not out yet. That's what we're still doing right now, is making sure that people see themselves in the blueprint and that we don't leave anything out. The other thing that we are working on pretty consistently is training resources. Over the last year, we've done 2 series. We do social equity series. Once a month, there is a webinar that kind of digs into a social equity topic. We also provide guides to our diversity action teams to help them think through different ways to think about how othering happens with people generally, and how we can create a sense of belonging. And so there's that. And then we also have social equity partners throughout the agency who are really being trained consistently in terms of what it can look like to really implement and embed equity into their role in the agency based on where they sit. So that will continue. And what we'll also add to that is social equity foundations, which will be training curriculum that people can plug into however it makes sense for them. We want to make sure that everything that we think is needed and people have said is needed is at their fingertips. So there's training tools and resources, again, that are in multiple curriculum. One of them is a glossary. One of them is really just an overview of a lot of foundational space. And then the third one is a group of activities that you can do over time or work your team through in segments. And then finally, Under 5, which is a series of like mini webinars. So it's micro learning, because so many of our staff are on crews and at front counters. And so being an hour webinar or having a retreat or having an all-day meeting are just not things they can do. But having videos that are 5 minutes or less, like right now, none of the ones we've recorded are actually over 4.5 minutes, that allows them to get information about a topic and then think about how it can be integrated into their day-to-day space. And then finally, recommendations to use the tools and resources in order to embed equity into team processes. So that's the things we're working on in terms of next steps, like actively right now, to make sure that those things are all up and ready for people by October 1, so that we can get to a place where we are spending time pivoting and evaluating and really helping people use those things. Equity is not a checkbox, and so it's really hard for people to think about how they do it and not think about, like, is there a form that I can check off, or like, how do I know I'm done? Because we're not, right? It's changing the way we think about our work. It's changing how we approach our work, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it would change some of our work. If you change how you think about it and how you approach it, it should mean that. But there are places that we really are thinking about this already, so there shouldn't be a big shift in that. And so I think that Louisa actually is a place that Safe Routes to School is shining. Safe Routes to School has been thinking about equity, really the program in itself can be thought about as a program that really digs into equity, because it's thinking about how race, income, geography, access to transportation really does affect young people getting to school safely. And so because of that, it's the program itself is a program around equity. And as you all have really tried to dig into your rubric and think about how you choose programs, I think that's also a place that other parts of the agency are starting to create, and you're thinking about editing. And so that's another place where I think you're a little bit further along, because no one else, there's many other places that don't have rubrics at all. So that hasn't been created. So instead of, again, evaluating it, they're developing them now. So I think that in terms of the agency as a whole, or some of the other divisions, places, programs, projects, Safe Routes to School is probably a bit ahead of many places.
Good answer, like that. We're ahead of everybody.
Thanks.
So that's really where social equity, the office is, and what we're doing. There also is a whole lot more, but I think that's a really good high level overview of where we are and what we're working on, what we've been doing over the last year. But I'm happy to answer questions or dive into deeper to anything if people want to hear something else. I also want to make sure I stay within my time, so I know you all have more things and have been here for a while.
We definitely have time for a couple of questions. We can push what's happening next a little bit. So I want to make sure that folks have time, that you have the full amount of time and folks have time to ask. Any questions?
I have a quick one. Just take advantage of this. Nikadris, you mentioned that there's a new policy as of July. Where can people find that policy? Equitable engagement policy, I think it was.
Yeah, I'm gonna just give it to you. It's an internal ODOT policy, and we literally it became live on July 1. What I also can do is send well, actually, Leanne has access to the link. There's a link inside of the Internet Hub. So on July 27th, there is a webinar that will introduce how the policy works to the public, or our stakeholders, our contractors, our consultants, our advisory committees can really plug into. They can hear how the policy works. Because again, we literally just started rolling out. The first webinar and training on it was how to implement it was yesterday. The next one is next week, and the 27th is really talking to stakeholders who don't necessarily have to fill out the paperwork for the compensation pieces. Will be on the 27th. And so, Leanne, if you want to share that with the advisory committee, that's a place where they can hear about it directly too.
The reason I ask is that might have some impact on the PIP, project identification program, and how the technical assistance team works. So that's exciting.
I shared it with the technical assistance team already, but I'll share it with
Great.
the committee. I'm gonna put
Any other questions, folks?
I'm putting the information in the chat right now, but I'll also send it in an email with all the other follow-up from this meeting.
Great. I'm not seeing any other questions. It's very exciting to be moving the freighter and pretty fast, hopefully. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining us, Nakashis. We really appreciate it. And thank you, Louise, for requesting the additional information. We will continue on with the last 10 minutes of the meeting. I'll share a couple more really quickly. This is just the overview of our SRAC work plan for 2021. We have our September meeting will be to, oh wow, this is not an updated version of our plan. This is what it used to be, and then Heidi and I changed it. So our next meeting will be in September, and we will look at the construction and the education side scoring matrix at the same time, and you'll be able to provide comments and suggest and edits. And we're hoping at the end of by the end of our meeting in September, we'll have some agreed upon scoring criteria for both of those programs. So all the work that we've done in the last 2 meetings will culminate in our September meeting, and we'll be able to send you those recommendations beforehand for you to look at and provide comments on. Then we have our optional travel meeting in October to go visit a completed Safe Routes to School project and some education programs. And then in November, we will actually be done with the construction program. So we can do, we're kind of holding that space in case we need more time from the September meeting. If we can't come to a decision, then we'll speak about it again in November. And right now we're holding that space for some potential equity training or workshop that we might be able to do with the whole group. We have a draft solicitation schedule for the 2022 grant solicitations that Heidi and I are going to run simultaneously for the first time. So our education grants, our construction grants, and the project identification program planning assistance will all be accepting applications at the same time, probably opening in February 1 for 45 days. And this fall, we will start communicating this out more broadly with one-pagers and doing presentations and talking about it at workshops and things along that line. What's important to note is that in April, we're planning for the SRAC to make a decision, a recommendation for the education grants. And then in November is when the SRAC will make recommendations for the construction grant. So next year will be pretty busy for this crew. So start looking forward to some exciting funding allocation recommendations for next year. Overview of the homework that we'll be sending you pretty immediately after this meeting on Monday morning. I'll follow up with you all with the preparation for our Leading with Race, Lead with Race deep dive in our next meeting. So we're asking folks to read a website and watch a video. And then later, we will be able to send you that draft scoring matrix that Heidi's going to create for education, I'm going to create for construction, and give you a couple of weeks to provide comments on that we can then come back and discuss in our November meeting. Also to note that we haven't done a check-in with individual committee members in a really long time. So Chris is going to be reaching out to you to schedule like a quick interview about how things are going for you, and just to give us a little bit more information on where you're at, and just do a quick check-in. So look for that from Chris, probably sometime between now and September. But if vacations get in the way, if it goes a little bit farther than that, we'll be flexible so that people can have vacation time. We do have some exciting news. Heidi, can you share the reason to celebrate this month?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to tell you this very good news. We're going to be putting out a press release soon about this, but I just wanted to tell you because I won't see you for a while. But one of my dreams getting into this position was to be able to expand the Jumpstart Bike Fleet program. And currently right now, we just have the one bike fleet that we loan out to a school every year. And my dream was to expand that so that we can touch more schools every year. And so Leanne and I have been working to get funding and approval to get more bike fleets. And Troy and Tracy have worked to make that happen for us. So we advocated to, we submitted an application to get some funding for 5 bike fleets and trailers. And so we've got it. So we're really excited because this is in addition to the funding that that I have for federal funding. And so this will be state funding that is dedicated to having at least one bike fleet per ODOT region that we loan out and we use with our technical assistance team in expanding our bike fleet program and our bike education program. So this is huge and super exciting for the state to be able to offer this to schools who can't afford to buy a bike fleet for their school, or to be able to house it and maintenance it and do all those coordination efforts. And so we have the capacity to be able to do that. So this will be part of a larger announcement with our technical assistance team in the near future. So I just wanted to give you a heads up and let you know about that. That's really exciting for us. We've had one bike fleet for many years, and so now we'll have at least 5 more to loan out, and so kids can learn to ride bikes and do it safely. And then secondly, I wanted to tell you, yesterday I presented your recommendation to the OTSC of the funding splits, and they unanimously voted to go ahead and approve our recommendation. So our split for the next round of funding will be 50-50. So 50% for the competitive funding and 50% for statewide funds. And so this is in best efforts to boost up communities and pay for some consultation services for them. And so in the next meeting, we'll be going over kind of our ideas and plans for how to do that. So I just want to thank all of you for taking the deep dive with me and sending this recommendation to the OTSC, and we can put our best foot forward to make our funding opportunities more accessible for communities of need. So that is all I have for you.
Thank you, Heidi. Yay! I'm so excited about the bike fleets. I cannot wait. So this is like the dance that Leanne does in the basement when she gets Brian's got it. So we have about 1 minute left. So I think what I'd like to do is mention that I will send Susan slides on Monday to you with sort of an opening for, like, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. We'll provide you with whatever answers, provide you with answers to your questions to that information. And we'll have her on the agenda again in the future to update us on that program. Rob, maybe you could close this out, and then anybody who would like to do a quick check-in about how the meeting went, Chris, are you okay with this? Just stick around for a couple minutes afterwards. So if you want to do the quick check-in on how this meeting went for you, stick around. So Rob, close us out.
First of all, I just want to say that's really great news about the bike fleet. Congratulations, and like good job. And I look forward to hearing about how it's going, seeing photos of kids learning to bike. That's just super exciting. I know our area has really benefited from the bike fleets that we have. So it's really great that's, communities that aren't able to afford their own will be able to benefit from this. I feel like this went felt faster than 3 hours to me. I guess that means it was a good meeting. When it goes by, it feels faster. I guess I'll stick around for the debrief so I can share that. But I want to thank everyone for everyone's positive energy and engagement in the meeting today. And we'll all see each other next month. So enjoy the rest of your summer. Hopefully it won't be too smoky or hot. And we'll see everybody in September.
Awesome.
Wonderful.
Feel free to stick around. I'll let Chris lead the debrief, but just take off whenever you need to.
Lead us in a debrief. Okay.
Or the check-in.
Check-in.
What do we usually do?
No, we just check in. I mean, I think a lot of people, I don't know if folks, I don't have air conditioning in my office, so I know that I'm a little parched right now.
Oh, I can do it.
No, it's fine. I would like to know what worked well, what could have gone better. These are long. It was very heavy on the presentation, but did the breakout rooms work? We always need more time in the breakout rooms. Good. Is there anything you would like to have seen more of or less of or different?
I have a question. When we do breakout rooms, do you tell the participants how much time we have, just so we're aware of that too?
I didn't say it out loud this time. It was on the slide, but I didn't make a big deal out of it.
It was on where?
Like whenever I presented a slide that said like, we're about to do a discussion on the left side, it was like 7 minutes. But
oh, got it. Okay.
I never said it out loud. And I realized that in the middle of one of the ones that I was in, because I couldn't remember how long it was either, because I hadn't said it.
Or just say like this, we're going to reconvene at such and such time, because I know like in one of my groups, like we didn't really answer I think we had a good discussion, but we didn't really answer the questions. And I think part of it was there was just not that awareness of like how much time we had. Great.
Yeah.
I think the breakout rooms are effective as well. I appreciate the ability, kind of the venue, is this sort of way to pull folks into the conversation that might not speak up in a larger group, even if it's virtual, maybe especially if it's virtual.
Would you like to see more time? I mean, more breakout groups? Like I would say this was like 80-20. Would you like, and I think that might be valuable, Leanne, as we come into September. Because it's pretty rich to get that.
I could see 70-30 being a reasonable number.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to toss in there about kind of the feedback on the construction criteria, because I for one put in a ton of comments, and I didn't mean them to be like really specific, this is what I want to happen. And I think maybe breakout rooms would have been good for people to weigh in more, because I think people were either like yes or no, or not sure, or maybe if we had seen them beforehand and then could talk, like if we'd seen them, I don't know. I just felt like I knew them all because I submitted most of them. But I don't know if people had a chance to ruminate on them.
I really appreciated all of your suggestions, because I'm like, I don't know exactly, like it was actually really helpful to put in a lot of suggestions, because we got a lot of like general, we want to see more of this. And then you were the one who actually had ideas for how to do it. Submitted them. So I hear what you're saying too.
Yeah, because they were like I was like, maybe more projects on tribal lands. I don't know if that's the right one. I just kind of wanted to hear more about like people's specific, like, and same with like the 25-mile-per-hour one. I don't know if that's right. That was just sort of like an idea. So I don't know. That was my only thought, is if folks had more, that maybe a breakout would be good to really dig into some of those. If people had seen them beforehand or something, I don't know. That's just my, just so you guys know that too about my comments. They weren't like meant to be set in stone. It was just sort of like, I've got lots of thoughts.
Right. And my thought on it was like, these are great. I should research these and see if they're possible. And so what we were looking for, and maybe we didn't say it very well, but it's just like, anybody just like completely against researching these? I don't want to come up with something that everyone's just like, no, I didn't even like. So I got what I needed out of it in a clumsy way. Like I also wish we would have had more opportunity for
maybe, and maybe we could do that at the next one with both those, as we have something to actually look at that you guys have put some more of that research into. We can talk in the small groups about what what it actually looks like or something like that.
Yeah.
I just feel like people talk more in the small groups.
They do.
Yep,
sure.
they definitely do. Anything else? Zhao, do you have anything?
Yeah, I had a question. I guess some feedback is I would have loved to see the population index before. I totally understand that like looking at something that you don't know what it is yet might not be helpful, but maybe some direction of like, we're looking at this population index if there are similar like data sets that like, your schools use, or if that exists. And as someone who's not like a data analyst, like it's a little harder for me to kind of look at this and say like, do we already have this? How does it compare? How does it like support the existing data sets? Like I would have loved to take this to like our data folks, and say like, is this helpful? Do we already have something like this, so that I could come better prepared to the conversation and say like, yes, like we should dig into it in this way. And I mean, I could totally do this afterwards too. So it's not a huge deal, but I'm wondering if at the next meeting, are we deciding whether or not to like dig into this more or like implement it? Because I'm not going to be at the next meeting. So I just wanted to check on that.
Well, if you do have some more thoughts about it, please send it my way. So my goal is to take all of the feedback that we heard and then turn it into a recommended scoring matrix. So right now what I'm hearing is like, yeah, we're interested in the TDI, we're interested in, and I'll go back and I'll review all of your notes and I'll do some research on like how to implement it, and then be able to provide for you as part of your homework a recommended scoring or a staff recommended scoring matrix that tries to take into consideration all this stuff. So then you would be able to review it and provide comments on that. And then at our next meeting is when we would look at that scoring matrix, bring all of your comments, and then make tweaks to the scoring matrix so that we can ideally land on a scoring matrix by the end of the meeting. So any information that you have between now and then is still very helpful and very relevant.
Okay.
So definitely open to that. And it might be a big conversation topic at the next meeting. If whatever I recommend is not what actually everybody was thinking, then we would know that, and then we would know, oh, okay, we're gonna dig back into this next month or
But to Zhao's point, folks will get it ahead of time. So that you won't just be presented at the meeting. And Zhao, if you're going to miss the meeting, maybe we figure out something where before you go, you can see it, so that you're.
Let me know when you're leaving, and we'll try and.
Hi, Rob.
Timing of that. I think don't you have a wedding or a honeymoon?
Yeah, I'm getting married the day after that meeting. So
I knew it was something amazing.
I have to be there.
No,
I would love
you
to
won't
see
be
it.
at that meeting.
No. Yeah, no, that would be great. Thank you. No, I didn't know if it was like, we just, got a presentation on this. Do we want to use it? I'm like, I don't know. Like, I'm not sure.
Right. Yeah. It's quick in that like I hear you, and you're absolutely right.
Awesome. I have to run. Thank you so much, everybody.
Bye, Zhao. Congratulations.
Yeah,
Thank
good to see you.
Bye.
Okay.
All right, so whoever Brian is, I'm actually going to put you in the waiting room because we're going to do a debrief. So I'm guessing you may have to wait for a while. So you will come back to the waiting room. Bye, Brian.
And then for the recording, if we could stop the recording.